Welcome to day 2 of the International Pure Conference for the Americas, Europe, and Africa. My name is Tina Moyer. I'm Senior Director of Industry and Academic Partnerships for Pure, and I'll be your moderator for track 2 today. We're going to start this session off with a discussion on how Pure also could be an institutional repository. You can submit your questions to the speaker by using the live QA button, either located at the bottom of your screen or over to the right. And time permitting, we will cover Q&A at the end of each presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Armand Guicherit. Armand, I hope I didn't unpronounce your name properly. He's the Chris IR manager from Delft University of Technology. Armand, would you like to take it away?
So the title of my presentation is Can Pure Also Be an Institutional Repository? So in my presentation, I will focus on the situation in the Netherlands, but I hope other Pure users can recognize themselves in the issues I cover. I will mostly speak on my own behalf, but part of it is based on the many discussions we've had on this subject with Dutch Pure User Group, and specifically the repository working group. And at the end of my presentation, I will ask you to give your input in a poll. I will begin by trying to answer the question, is Pure an institutional repository? And if you go by the information on the Elsevier website, the answer seems to be no. The suggestion is that you link your institutional repository to Pure. But obviously, this is not quite true, because Pure does offer many, although perhaps not all, functionalities that you would expect from any real institutional repository, and probably even go beyond these. Just think of the integration of Shared per Romeo on Paywall and DOAJ, and which save our metadata staff a great chunk of their time in their day-to-day work. In fact, Pure's set of open access tools has been so persuasive that over a span of 7 to 8 years, the majority of Dutch universities decided to trade in their existing institutional repository for Pure. And I will go into the reasons for that shortly. But first, here are some key figures based on the findings of a survey I recently sent out to the members of the Dutch Pure User Group. So currently, nearly 2/3 of Dutch Pure customers don't have a separate repository. All, except one, allow their users to upload full text files into Pure, and 16 out of 19 allow these files to be downloaded from the Pure portal. And finally, 2/3 allow Pure to be harvested over OAI PMH by services such as Narcis, the Dutch National Research Gateway, and OpenAir. In short, the majority of Dutch customers use Pure de facto as their institutional repository. So for me, the interesting cases are those where the institute has decided to trade in their existing repository for Pure. And this is the case for about half of the 13 Dutch universities. So why did some universities decide to replace a repository while others have stubbornly stuck with them? A survey of the Erasmus University from about 2 years ago tells us that many made this decision mostly out of convenience. Existing repositories were often custom built, used open source software, which required staff with programming skills and who are not easily found within our own institutions. Maintaining an interface between Pure and an institutional repository is complex and time-consuming. Pure took away all that. It came with loads of functionality, enabling end users to upload their files, check OA statuses, and moreover, it came with a sophisticated portal. Those who held on to their repositories did so because they preferred a procedure where the library handles the depositing process rather than allowing researchers to upload their own files. And others already had a good working portal solution in place and did not want to create yet another point of access. Finally, some simply did not feel comfortable by giving over so much control, especially to a party like Elsevier. So we have seen that most Dutch customers are using Pure as their institutional repository. But what do we actually expect from an institutional repository? All of us have committed ourselves to the goals of open access and open science, which means that we need to offer services to make our open access policies operational. And for this, we need to have a repository solution which has the functionalities that these services require. Institutional repositories have been in use in the Netherlands since about 2004. So I think it is safe to say that we have a reasonable good idea of what we expect from an institutional repository. So perhaps the easiest approach is just to look at the different ways we currently use our repositories. So the obvious use of a repository is to provide access to open access preprints and other author versions of published papers. In the Netherlands, as in many other countries, institutional repositories were set up during the early days of the open access movement. And we even set up a national open access portal called Narcis, which is still here today. So providing access to early versions of our published articles remains the main purpose of our repositories, but other uses have become prevalent since then. Firstly, repositories provide a platform where we store our PhD theses and make them findable and accessible online. Repositories are also widely used for archiving published journal articles, open access or not, for instance, by using a request for copy service. Partly, we do this to circumvent restrictive and unfair policies by publishers, but also to make sure these articles remain in existence even when journals go out of business. You can see the literature on reference rot if you want to know more about this. The Taveerne Amendment, which I mentioned here in my presentation, refers to a relatively recent change in Dutch copyright law in 2020, which has led to the use of repositories to provide free access to published articles, even when they are still behind a publisher's paywall. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, repositories are increasingly used to publish grey literature. The papers, reports, bibliographies, guidelines, technical instructions, manuals, etc. All kinds of material which researchers just want to share, to quickly make available online so they can be shared with their peers or to comply with funder requirements. And it is especially these latter uses that we see are becoming more prevalent and which complicate things when you use Pure as a repository. I will give an example from my own university to illustrate what I mean. And what you see here is an excerpt from the reference list of a 2018 publication, where the authors cite a paper containing a tool description. They have done so by using the URL to our Pure portal. So obviously, this is an example of bad citation practice, but that's not the point. The interesting thing here is that the authors have decided to use Pure as their publishing platform. And when we first found out about this, we were not sure what to do because we had not really considered this as a possibility, and therefore we didn't have any policies in place to deal with it. But it just felt wrong. And the reason for this was that we didn't perceive Pure as a publishing platform or even as a repository, because at Delft we have a separate repository. In our view, Pure was an administrative system intended to register existing published outputs so we can report periodically how much all the hard research works had paid off. But of course, this example is not an isolated case. In the words of the Dutch football legend Johan Cruyff, you won't see it until you get it. From the perspective of researchers, Pure is just another tool where they can share their work with their peers. Not so different from Mendeley, ResearchGate, Zenodo, or Google Scholar. Realizing that researchers had an explicit need for this kind of soft publishing within our institution was a bit of an eye-opener and made us ask ourselves why it would be so problematic if we did allow our researchers to disseminate their work using the institutional repository. In short, it made us rethink the purpose of our repository. Researchers like to have a platform to share their papers with their peers without having to go through the hassle of submitting their paper to a journal. But this is not the only reason for them to share. The EU and other funders are actively encouraging researchers to publish their publications and other research outputs open access in what they call trusted repositories. And they specify in great detail just how exactly researchers have to do this and what the requirements are for these repositories. If researchers need easy-to-use publishing platforms to comply with funder requirements, and we want to provide these services using our existing institutional repositories, then we need to make sure they are up for the job. So if we agree that Pure is an institutional repository, Pure will need to be able to provide the necessary functionality without fault. And this is where it might get a bit tricky, because if Elsevier is not able or unwilling to make this commitment, we will need to look for an alternative solution. For some time now, the Dutch Pure user group has been monitoring unresolved issues surrounding the repository functionality of Pure. The repository working group, which has been set up for this purpose, aims to identify these requirements and push for the development of relevant functionalities. The group has created a list of high priority issues, but so far the group has been unsuccessful in convincing Elsevier to resolve these issues. We have presented our issues to Elsevier in our user group meetings, but so far we have not received a conclusive answer to our question. Is Elsevier going to resolve any of these issues anytime soon? The lack of clarity is frustrating, and it is not clear to us why this doesn't get the priority we feel it should have. Perhaps it is because the additional functionality would simply have too big an impact on the data model, and rather than adapting Pure, perhaps the better solution would be to improve support for existing repository connectors so we can provide the missing functionality in our separate repositories. For those of us who do not have a separate repository, Elsevier could maybe offer one to them, which Elsevier would then support and possibly host. Thomas Gurn has alluded to such a solution during one of our meetings, suggesting that maybe digital commons could be integrated with Pure. But in another meeting, he said that this was not a very likely scenario. So the question is, does Elsevier want to continue to support both the integrated repository solution and in addition offer a better support for an external repository? Or is it better to concentrate efforts in improving only one solution, meaning that those who do not want to use the solution will need to find their own? To summarize, here are the main points of my presentation so far. I have tried to answer the question if Pure is an institutional repository from both Elsevier's and the user's customer's perspective. And I've argued that the purpose of an institutional repository is shifting to new users and new funder requirements, resulting in new functionality needs. I've also argued that unless Elsevier commits to support these needs, we might have to consider alternatives for our repository needs. So here we are. It's time for the poll, which I hope to find out more about your views on these matters. But before we do, I want to make one final point. Perhaps some of you feel a bit disappointed because I haven't asked the elephant in the room question. Should Pure be our institutional repository? After all, Elsevier's publishing business model is one of the reasons we all have institutional repositories in the first place. So is it not weird to hand over such an important part of your digital infrastructure to a company we have been struggling with for decades? I had a discussion on this subject very recently with some of my colleagues at the TU Delft. And at Delft, we certainly are investigating alternative routes because we believe the way to go in open science is to use open software and an open infrastructure. And this is not to say that the commercial parties cannot have a place in there, but it would certainly mean that we'll have to adapt. For us, this means we have to get organized better, be really committed, be willing to accept less sophisticated and elegant solutions, and be willing to collectively invest in an open infrastructure. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I will now hand over to the moderator to do the poll.
Thank you, Armand. That was an interesting interesting discussion, particularly since the previous discussion before you had different perspectives as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But are we ready to go into the poll now? If you guys, at the very bottom, there's a live poll. If you click on that, if you guys could, all the registrants could do that now. And Armand, are you going to give the results of the poll afterwards? Is that my understanding?
I'd be happy to, but I have to see when the poll. I think we've agreed to allow for a minute for people to complete the poll, and I understand that it can be shared on the main screen so we can all see the results.
Yeah, it will be. So everyone that is attending, please engage in the poll if possible. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so, Armand, if that's okay.
That's fine, yes.
And we have some questions coming in the chat as well, which we'll address. Maybe we can start talking a little bit about the first question that comes in, Armand. And that is Pure a trusted repository as required by EU? Or is this a question connected to the unanswered, unresolved issues that the National Dutch Repository Group have sent to Elsevier? That was the question, Armand.
Yeah, so I'm thinking the definition of a trusted repository, you have to be registered in Open Door. And Open Door, I've seen, have also included now a list of Plan S requirements. So I think once you are able to meet the requirements of Open Door, you should be a trusted repository. As we do not use Pure as our repository, I cannot answer that for Pure, but I'm sure that people at Elsevier have looked at this, or some of the customers probably as well. But yes, I think you're not trusted unless you're registered, I think, in Open Door.
Yeah. So let's see if we can summarize the poll now quickly, and then we'll wait for other questions to pop in. And if not, I certainly have a couple questions for you as well, Armand. Oh, another question has popped in. Is the poll summarized? Can you see the poll summary, Armand?
1 second. I don't know where I have to look for the summary. Perhaps. On the taskbar, yeah, I can see.
Do you see it there, live poll on the taskbar?
Yes, I can see the live poll. So I'm assuming everybody can see this and on their own screen. Yes. So the first question was, Elsevier should be clear on the question whether Pure is also an institutional repository. Well, nearly everybody says yes, except for 1% actually, I have to say.
Okay.
That can only be one person, I would imagine. So that is good. I mean, I think that's something we can discuss then, Tina.
Okay.
Do you see Pure as an institutional repository? That was the second question, and there's a more of a mixed reply. So 41% says yes, and 39% no. So it's about 20% say I don't know, which is also interesting. I mean, it is not clear.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the best conclusion. Institutional repositories are an acceptable platform for the publication of grey literature. And I see that 3/4 of the people, 76%, agree with that statement, which I find interesting as well, because of the implications of using Pure as a publishing platform. I don't think Elsevier, I don't think you thought that Pure would be a good platform for publishing. If Pure is also an institutional repository, it's question 4, then it should comply with funder OA requirements. Well, that's nearly everybody agrees with that. So that's something we can work on together, hopefully. And if Elsevier doesn't want to further develop Pure's repository functionality, they should focus on better support for separate repositories. And that's about 80% is agreeing with that, and 20% say, I don't know, and that's possibly because they never had a repository in place. So no opinion on this.
Yeah, so
and the last, yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Armand.
I was just going to finish, and then it's so the last question is, if Elsevier would offer a separate but connected repository, my organization would probably be interested. And I see that 62% say perhaps, and 25% say yes, we would, and 13% say no. So that concludes the poll. I find it very interesting to see what the results are.
Yeah, that was good questions for the poll, Armand. So I think we have a lot of other questions that have come in. I will present those to you as well. Helen asked, do you have sources of information about how Pure does or does not support indexing in Google Scholar? Are there papers on this, Armand?
Well, as far as I know, Pure cannot be indexed in Google Scholar. But I stand corrected if I'm wrong here. I'm not. We once inquired if Pure could be indexed by Google Scholar, and it is very complicated because Google Scholar has a very specific way of visiting repositories. And if you don't offer the proper interface, it will not get your...
Yeah, I think somebody responded. You're right, Armand. Helen, yes, Google Scholar does work directly with Pure Portal and fully indexes the pages. That is correct. That is
but
correct.
I think this is also problematic possibly, because if you have a separate repository, do you want Pure to be indexed in Google Scholar? I mean, this is for many people, I think, who have a repository on the back end of Pure, but also with a live interface. Then you have two places where the same repository is being harvested. And I think this is something that as an institution you have to be aware of. And what does that mean? I mean, it's not bad to be indexed twice in Google Scholar, but it's also impacting, of course, the metrics that are presented in Google Scholar.
Right. And I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty with the chat box here. There's another question that came in, Armand, and it's cut off a little bit. Stuart asks, yes, we use Pure as our IR and have looked into registering Open Door, but the results is we cannot register as the Pure portal and it's cut off. Can you read the rest of the chat by any chance, Armand? I'm sorry.
Is that by Stuart?
Yes.
We cannot register as the Pure portal currently stands. In the UK, this gives us real and pressing issues to comply with UKRI-OA requirements. Well, I'm not familiar with the UKRI-OA requirements exactly. But yes, I can imagine that the requirement would be that you have to be registered in Open Door. So this is, I think it just adds to the long list of repository functionality issues that have already been identified. Personally, I think maybe it's good to collaborate between user groups on this specific theme, like there now is an advanced award management module working group.
Correct.
So I think, but then first, Tina, I think we need from Elsevier some clarity on the position of Pure as a repository.
Yeah, I feel a little awkward being in a position as the moderator and responding on that. But what I can tell you is, Pure's asked to be many things to many people, right? And we do have quite a number of customers who store data file in file repositories and synchronize the metadata. But and admittedly, Pure does file storage, and but unfortunately, some of our customers have bigger needs beyond file management functions. Gaps in, I think Leah in the previous presentation talked about long-term preservation, digital preservation. Pure cannot, is not the source for them. There's a clear distinction between how they use Pure and what they use their repository for. And things like museum preservations or video and audio, so they're looking to Pure as the source that's truth for the metadata, but are looking for or connecting other sources to their external repositories for things like long-term preservation. What I will say is we are very much aware of the discussions, and we are very much aware of the gaps that have been addressed in terms of how you're using or the Dutch are looking at it to use it for. And, we are committed to close those gaps, particularly for smaller institutions who don't have a strong need for everything that a huge institutional repository could deliver. obviously. And there are certain cases in the Netherlands that certainly reflect that. So, it's really a question of balancing hundreds of customers who'd like to integrate their metadata with IRs into Pure, and then being able to support requests coming in from the Dutch user group as well, Armand. So, yeah, I think I don't have all the answers for you. I'm not sitting on the product team and managing that. But I can tell you that we're very cognizant of everything that has been discussed in both the previous panel discussion and your discussion today.
Yeah, I've seen we've run out of time already, but I saw a message from Davida Erasmus that it might be a good idea to have an international working group on repository functionalities or open access commitments. So I'd be very happy to play a role in that, and I will try. I see a lot of very interesting questions have come in. I will export them and try to contact the people who ask the questions, and I think.
And Armand, just to remind them, if you stay on the platform, people can engage with you in the live discussion. So I would encourage that as well.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, I will make sure I'm here.
Right. Okay, so we're going to transition. Thank you so much, Armand. That was a great discussion. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll pick back up on track 2 on managing the research application process at Queen's University of Belfast. Thank you all.